All right, we're here, you guys. We are live. And this is the first time I've ever had 3 of us here. This is really cool. It makes me wonder how many we can do. One of these days we should just have like a huge party and have like a Brady Bunch situation going on and just talk about OCD. So you guys, we already have lots of awesome questions coming on. If this is new to you, welcome. So this is one of our live webinars that we do every Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m. Central. I'm here usually on Mondays, but I'm here on Tuesdays today too, just bringing on some new guests for you guys to give you some new perspective. So I have Emily here as well as Jackie. So Jackie might look familiar because we've done these before together a couple times. And Emily, if you have ever been on my podcast before, or maybe even my Instagram, you've probably heard me mention Emily. Emily was actually on my podcast as a guest. So she shared her story a couple of episodes ago on my podcast, and I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about that as she introduces herself. So just to give you guys some context, I'm going to let them introduce themselves really quickly, and then we'll get into some questions. So Jackie, why don't you go first?
All right. My name is Jackie Shapin, like Jenna shared, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Los Angeles, California, and I treat OCD, anxiety, and eating disorders, and that's me. If you're interested in working with me, you can go to my website, which is JackieShapinTherapy.com, or you can follow me on Instagram, which is Jackie Shapin Therapy, and that's how you can find me.
You did a group too, Jackie. What was going on with that?
Yeah, thanks. So I did a 6-week OCD treatment / support group, and today's actually possibly the last day. It was the first time we did it, and it was great. We kind of got to go through what is OCD and what is ERP, creating a hierarchy with everybody, and getting to like imagined exposures. And so I might have that again if there's interest, or I might kind of do it as a support group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. Especially, I think there's something about the support group aspect of it and just like the psychoeducational aspect of it. Obviously that's why these people are here. There's so much that you can gain just from the psychoeducation piece of it. And I love that that's something that you offered. I feel like that went by really quickly.
I know. And I think my favorite part of it was that everyone got to meet each other. And I don't think any of them knew anyone with OCD. So it was amazing to see how much they related and how comfortable they were.
Yeah, that's so cool to see. We see that in our support groups all the time. So, if you do that again, where can they find that? Just on your website, on your Instagram? So they should probably stay up to date with you. Yeah,
the best way to see new things that are coming is probably my Instagram, which is at Jackie Shapin Therapy.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, super cool. And then Emily, why don't you tell them a little bit about your story too? What kind of makes you more motivated to show up on a place like this, like tonight?
So I'm Emily, as Jenna said. I was on her podcast. I talked about my eating disorder recovery and my experience with OCD as it related to my eating disorder, and how as I started recovering from my eating disorder, my OCD started getting worse in other areas, and how I've really had to be super attentive to that as I've chosen recovery for my eating disorder, that I don't let my other OCD thoughts and behaviors get worse, because I obviously want to choose recovery for all aspects of that. And I share about my OCD journey and my eating disorder recovery and other stuff on my Instagram, Emily L. Feldman.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I refer people to that episode all the time, anytime. And it's really common. Jackie, this is one of your specialties too, so you probably see it a lot. Anytime that, someone's OCD gets a little bit better, but then their eating disorder comes back to play and rear its ugly head, it's I have to share Emily's podcast, because we went over so many awesome things. We went over the core fear and control, and really truly having to kind of just surrender to all of those things.
I need to check that out. I haven't listened to it, and it sounds like right up my alley.
So. Yeah, it was really, really good. It was really good. And like I said, it's one thing to hear about it from therapists, right? But it was another it was great to hear it from someone who's actually lived it and been through the treatment and all that stuff. Awesome. Okay, awesome. So I try really hard not to give reassurance here, but, you know, take it with a grain of salt. We're going to do our best here. So let's get into some questions. Before we do that really quickly, I will introduce myself in case I'm new to anybody. So my name is Jenna Overbaugh. I'm a therapist here at OCD, but I also handle a lot of our community engagement. So I manage our support group program. If you haven't checked it out yet, definitely try that out. You can access that just on our NoCD app, which is free on the marketplace or app store, free. You don't have to be involved in NoCD therapy services in order to participate. So it's just a really awesome opportunity, like Jackie said, to be with other people who have OCD and just get that experience that you're not all alone in this. So off we go, guys. Off we go. So from Gina, how do you tell if it's relationship OCD or real feelings / thoughts for your partner? And I'll preface this right now. Even though this says relationship OCD, this is a lot of what we say is going to be really applicable to other themes and other subtypes too, right? So you could easily exchange this for yourself instead of it saying relationship OCD. Well, how do I know that, you know, this isn't actually threatening versus like something that I've just made up in my head? How do I know that I didn't actually do this thing in my memory that I think I did, but I'm not 100% sure, right? Like, this is going to be about relationship OCD because that's what the question is formed as, but what we say is going to apply to other subtypes too. So feel free to take what we're saying and apply it to your own circumstance. So I'll go first and then I'll get your guys' thoughts on it. So there's never going to be this like thunderbolt hallelujah moment where everything just like fits and you're like, oh, I get it. Like, that's definitely 100% OCD, or that's definitely 100% a real problem. There's never going to be that moment of clarity. I think at least until you consistently challenge yourself with the behavioral experiments and the exposures, then you might eventually have that moment of clarity. But again, I don't think that it's something that comes in this like thunderbolt moment of clarity where it just washes over you and you're completely sure. Part of the exposure is that you have to take that chance, right? And it's going to feel irresponsible. It's going to feel like you're not sure. You know, let's say that one of the doubts that you have is that, you know, this person might be cheating on you or might not actually be the person for you. There's no way to know that 100%. And that's the scary part. That's where OCD comes in and is the doubt disorder, makes you want to know 100%, and you're never going to be able to know 100%. And so it's all about, you'll get your answers from doing, not by thinking, is the piece of advice, like the practical piece of advice that I would give in this scenario. You'll get your answer from doing, not by thinking. And I think when OCD is really prevalent and you're feeling very urgent, like I have to figure this out urgently, I have to figure it out right now, that's not a good time to make a call about your relationship, right? So if there's a sense of urgency about something, probably not a good sign. Urgency tends to be the giveaway to me. Like if someone feels like they need to urgently figure it out, they need to urgently know, I would wait. I would wait until that sense of urgency dies a little bit, and then you can kind of view the situation from a less emotional and more logical place. Woo! Go ahead, you guys. I'm going to get my dog upstairs.
Emily, I don't know if this is a particular theme that you've struggled with, but like Jenna said, it can be applied to every theme. Did you want to share about this?
Yeah, I don't have any really experience with this theme, but something that my therapist said to me last week actually was like, what's the, there's like a difference between it's a small, like it's a possibility versus like what's the probability of it actually like happening or being true. There's always a possibility, but the probability is probably really low. And then once you kind of like discern that, realistically the probability is low, then I think that's how you can kind of differentiate between the OCD and then like a real thought.
Yeah. I think that's a fallacy that OCD makes us fall into sometimes. Like, oh, if something is uncertain and I don't know, it must be 50-50. It's like, that's not necessarily true. And we don't know what the probability is, and we'll never know that. That's like some hypothetical thing out in the universe that we'll never know, but it's not always necessarily 50-50, right? Like, I'm unsure if I get in the car tomorrow if I'm going to die or not, but that's not necessarily a 50-50 situation. I don't know what it is, but I don't think it's 50-50. So hopefully that's helpful. Thank you guys for your help with that. My dog had a lot to say, so he needs to go. This is a good one. I've been wrapping my head around this myself lately because I do a lot of work. I've been doing some work lately with family members, and as I work with kids more and more, just something that kind of trips me up. So how do I support a loved one who engages in compulsions? So when you're struggling, like maybe as a caregiver or a family member, your loved one is the one who has OCD and they're engaging in compulsions. How do you support that person without accommodating the OCD? And it can feel really tricky, like this gray line. Like, I want to support my person, I love my person, but I don't want to give in to the OCD. And sometimes that line can be really tricky. Jackie or Emily, what do you guys think? I'm going to gather my thoughts.
I think this one's really difficult. I think that the person who is struggling with OCD, I always recommend that if a loved one wants to support them, that they talk about it either with their treatment team or like with their family. It's not helpful for a loved one to do like random exposures and randomly kind of mess things up, because that's just, it's not helpful and it's kind of missing the point. So I think it's really important to communicate with your team and make sure that the person with the OCD, like, you know where they're at and you talk about what's going to be helpful for them versus just making it up for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. But Emily, I kind of want to hear your perspective, like, especially as someone who has taken that primary role of, like, you were the person who was doing the compulsions. You know, what was it like for your family members or loved ones, and what was helpful for you in that situation?
I definitely think that it's helpful. Like, this person, I don't think has OCD, to ask the question, but if you do have OCD, to communicate with the people that you're living with and like kind of let them know, like, hey, you know, I'm working on these exposures. So like, I'm going to try to, you know, resist like engaging in these behaviors this amount of times, or like this day or something like that. But I also think that it can be really helpful, like, as you're progressing, to like communicate, like, and just let them know, like, hey, like, if you notice that I'm kind of falling back into like some old like patterns and I'm not necessarily even noticing them, like, let me know, because that happened to me, and I was like, it did feel really hard to like hear that, like, wow, you know, like, I feel like I'm doing better, but now you're telling me that I'm not doing better. But it, like, if it's done like in a supportive way where you're like, hey, like, I'm a little bit worried about you, like, you're doing really well, but I started noticing that you're doing these behaviors again, and I noticed that you stopped doing them, and I just like want to make sure that everything is okay, and like, I'm supporting you the best that I can.
Mm-hmm. I think that's perfect. Like, what a perfect little script to follow. I think what that does is it just allows for really supportive feedback to take place. And I like what Jackie said too about ideally, and I say ideally because I would like for it to always happen this way. But oftentimes it doesn't, or it can't for whatever reason. But the ideal scenario is that everyone involved is on the same page. So like, ideally everyone who's within their own living quarters and living kind of together, or in that close-knit support network, would be on the same page and involved with that therapist. And we would all come to an agreement together about how to kind of reduce these accommodations and kind of what expectations needed to be met, and kind of a general timeline for that to take place. So family accommodations are huge in kind of the maintenance of OCD and anxiety related behaviors. You could get a really good list if you just look up the family accommodation scale. You'll find, I think it's like the first link, it's a really great PDF. It's a little self-report questionnaire where you can kind of identify to what extent you engage in certain accommodation behaviors. And the goal is to not engage or to, greatly reduce these accommodation type of behaviors. Things like giving reassurance to your loved one, waiting around for your loved one. Like, let's say if they're in the shower and they're taking 6 hours, you wait around for them, or you change dinner plans because of that. So even subtle things like that could be an accommodation. I will say that cutting that out cold turkey, like going from, 0 to 100 is also not effective, like especially with kind of no explanation of why or agreements or, gentle discussion about that. That's not effective, like to just cut everything out completely. And so, yeah, I think for that reason, it's so critical to have everyone be on the same page with the guidance and the support and feedback of a therapist, so you can all kind of come to an agreement about, okay, like this is the last week where we are, we'll wait for you for, you have 6 hours this week. Starting next week, it's 5 hours. And if you aren't able to do that, like we're going to continue with dinner without you. Like whether you are still in the shower or not, like we're going to continue with our plans. And so I think that's probably the best way. And my other piece of practical advice here is trying to remember, wanting to support the person and be able to say things like, I love you. I really care about you. I believe that you can do this. I believe that you can do this. That doesn't necessarily need to be any reassurance about the content of their obsession, right? So you don't need to say like, it's okay, you're not going to get sick from this, or it's not that big of a deal. Like that it's just a headache, you're not actually having a brain tumor. You don't actually have a brain tumor or anything. Like you can support the person without it having to be any involvement in the content of what that obsession is in a way that would be reassurance. So saying things like, yeah, I love you. I believe in your ability to do hard things. Someone, love is an open door, is saying like showing empathy, not giving reassurance. So yeah, all good ideas. This is a really simple one. Anything can be an exposure. Is participating in OCD, watching lives, participating in groups, posting and answering questions. Anything is an exposure, right, guys? What do you think?
I think it could be a form of reassurance if someone's continually looking for answers by coming.
100%.
It depends on who you are, and it depends what your goals are. It depends what your, like hierarchy is and what you're trying to accomplish,
Mm-hmm.
So definitely it depends, but if it feels like an exposure and you're resisting any behaviors after, then
yeah,
probably.
OCD can really latch on to anything. I've worked with people who love soap because they hate contamination. I've worked with people who are terrified of soap because they don't like what it is like, feels like on their hands. They don't like chemicals. It literally can be anything. I have people who are terrified, before they sit down on a toilet seat, they need to check it to make sure nothing is there. I have some people who are terrified of looking at a toilet seat and they would rather just not look at it. It totally depends. You have to ask yourself, what's the function of that behavior? What's the function of that behavior? Am I wanting to look? Is that based on anxiety? Am I wanting to go to the lives, or am I not wanting to do the lives? You just continually have to ask yourself, what's the function of that behavior? And yeah, if it's anxiety provoking for you and you would rather not, don't want to go on those lives, don't want to post my question in case I'm a fraud or an imposter or whatever, that would be a great exposure. But it could also be reassurance. So you really just have to be attentive and ask yourself kind of what's going on. This is a good one too. I like the SpongeBob. The SpongeBob is what drew me.
This is like the backdoor spike, right?
Mm-hmm.
When someone's
there's a lot that we can talk about. Jackie, why don't you take that one quick? How do I get over my fear that my OCD will eventually come back?
I think accepting, or even kind of bringing on okay, maybe it will come back. I'm going to sit with the uncertainty, because that's what a lot of response prevention is sitting with the uncertainty. this is also really common when someone is making progress in their like management of OCD. This fear, they call it the backdoor spike, this fear that it's going to come back or it's going to get really bad again. And that's kind of a session that you can respond to the same way of maybe it will, maybe it won't. Continue doing your exposures as if it is going to come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I'm hearing like, go ahead, Emily.
I had OCD and it did come back, and honestly, like, it's not necessarily like a bad thing. I did exposure therapy before, and now I know what it is. I know how to do it. I know that it's like, it's okay. Like I did hard things, really, really hard things the first time, and it felt so impossible. It felt so scary. And those like thoughts and those fears that I had like the first time that I really had OCD when I was younger, like now they don't impact me at all. And it's now like completely different things, but it's still like the same process of like going through like ERP and doing that work. And so like, yeah, it really sucks. And no one wants to have OCD, or like you don't want to have it again. But if you like are doing the work now, like you're going to be more prepared for it next time. And like, you're going to know like how to get the support that you need and how to work the steps once you get back there.
Yeah, I love that. And can you, because that was another question that was asked previously, like how OCD can kind of jump from theme to theme. I think, Emily, you were saying how like when you struggled with it the first time around, you did exposure therapy with it and it was one type of content, but then when it came back, it was something different, right?
Yeah.
So many people get tripped up by that. So many people get tripped up about the fact that it's somehow different, that, you know, and it is experienced as different, but it's really the same treatment, right? I think that blows people's minds sometimes, like that you can take that treatment, exposure and response prevention, and you just apply it, right? There might be some small adjustments as far as it's like a really classic recipe. Like there might be some differences in the seasonings, but the meat and potatoes, like the core of it, the content of it is exactly the same. You expose yourself to the anxiety provoking situations with the intention of reducing avoidance, reducing compulsions, and you try to resist or reduce the compulsions that you would normally do to try to make yourself feel better about that. So if it's about harm, you do exposures in that realm. If it's about later on and it comes back and it's sexual intrusive thoughts or it's contamination or real event OCD, you just have to pivot. You have to pivot. So I guess, Emily, like what would be your advice? Because my advice to people would be to like just recognize it as soon as possible and apply it, right? Like just trying to be your own therapist type of situation, like just being very attentive and very vigilant. So I guess, how did you manage that? How were you able to like nip it in the bud and apply it?
Well, to be honest, like the second time it came, I didn't really nip it in the bud. But like as it like, so I was like diagnosed with my eating disorder, and as I went through my treatment for my eating disorder, like it did like shift the themes, and then I was able to be like, okay, like I know that this is happening. It's the same thing that happened like with my eating disorder behaviors. I know that like I need to like be accountable. I need to tell my therapist what's going on, you know, like set exposure goals, and be like open to doing the hard things and being like just focusing on doing the exposures. And also I think that if you have OCD and it comes back, like it takes a long time for some people to get diagnosed with OCD and to find a good therapist who like will do ERP and like do treatment the right way. So if you have OCD and it comes back, make sure that you like get the appropriate support and you don't like just be like, it's okay, like I can, you know, do it all by myself. If you really need the support, get the support that you need, because I mean, like therapists are there for a reason, and there are like such good therapists and supports like OCD out there to help people who have OCD.
And it's so treatable. That's what's so sad about it taking people 10 plus years to get the right help.
Yeah, and I think in the research that I've always been taught, and I think it's still up to date, that it's that ERP is more effective for OCD and anxiety than any other treatment for any other disorder. So you get such a good bang for your buck, and yeah, it's just a shame that more people don't know about it. So yeah. And yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is that radical acceptance that it may come back. I'm of the opinion that you can recover from OCD, but I don't think that you can cure OCD. I think that to cure OCD kind of implies that you like go in your brain and you zap it out and then it's gone and there's no chance of it ever coming back and you're immune to it. And I don't think that that's true. I think that life scenarios and stressors and, changes in life or any, so many things can kind of turn that light switch on, whether it's for the first time or for the 50th time. And I would just have that radical acceptance of it is what it is. Like, this is the nature of obsessive compulsive disorder. It's possible that it might come back. And, not adding, I think in radical acceptance, right? Like, we don't need to add to that suffering by fearing it unnecessarily. Like Emily said, we can kind of feel empowered by the fact that, I did recover in some regard, right? Like, I was able to apply these principles to my obsessions, to my compulsions. I can take that and I can apply it the same way. I have really good resources and I know what to do now better than I did before. So maybe those peaks won't be as high as they were the first time around. There's a lot of good things that can come from that too. It doesn't mean that it has to come back. And honestly, I think that I would be willing to bet that the more accepting you are of it coming back and the less like anxious and afraid you are of it coming back, the less likely it will come back, right? Like, the more that you accept it, the less likely that it will be to come back anyway. I saw a really cool Instagram quote today about how, I'll have to find it. It was about like how OCD is like the weirdest battle ever. Like, you only win when you stop fighting. Is kind of what it was, right? Like, you only will really win with OCD when you stop fighting, when you stop like having so much skin in the game, when you stop debating with it so much. So that would be my ad there. Your OCD will probably level out and you will probably recover as soon as you stop needing to know, as soon as you stop fighting, and as soon as you kind of surrender to that possibility and be okay with it. Awesome. And if you guys see any questions that you particularly like, you're welcome to let me know.
There was one question that I saw, and it was like, how do I know if I actually have OCD, or
like feeling like someone felt like they were like an imposter, or
yeah. I don't know where it was, but I thought I saw it. Oh, I'm so scared that I have been faking my OCD to the point where it's taking over my life. I feel like I'm not allowed to be part of the OCD community.
Let's go for it. Yeah, I'll try to find it. Emily, if you want to go for it, I will try to find it and put it up.
So I feel like I definitely experienced this. I also have OCPD, so they kind of like overlap and also like don't overlap at the same time. So I do feel like I sometimes like I'm not like good enough at being OCD because I don't have like some of the common themes that other people have. But it doesn't matter, because if you're still having the like dysfunction, if you're still having the problems, like if you're still experiencing those thoughts and it's hard to like get through your day, it's hard to, do quote unquote normal things without like having to engage in a safety behavior, you're valid in that. And it doesn't, like, you don't have to attach yourself to a label to like get help or like get better, like even if like you don't have OCD, but you're still experiencing like some kind of like safety behavior to like escape something, like you can still, get better and like engage in some like opposite action to like make sure that it doesn't get worse or like spiral into anything. You don't have to get to a point where you're like can't get out of bed, debilitated to get help, but also like just recognizing that, you know, you're worthy of treatment at any point. It doesn't necessarily like matter what diagnosis you have.
You know what would be the best exposure, Sarah, is that you keep participating and being a part of the OCD community, regardless of this intrusive thought. You know, great exposure is, I'm not sure, but I'm going to keep participating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as a result, I think a couple of things will happen, right? So, you know, Sarah or anyone else out there who's struggling with this, I think as you continue to participate, as you continue to tell people about these intrusive thoughts that you're worried aren't serious enough or don't legitimize your diagnosis enough, or, you know, other people might look poorly upon that, as you open yourself up and you share more, you'll, one, get used to it because we get used to these things. Two, you'll open yourself up to so much learning, so many learning opportunities. So by holding yourself in, by shrinking yourself down, consciously or not, every time you don't share, every time you hide, every time you minimize your experience, consciously or not, you are giving into the concept that you aren't important and that you don't have OCD. Consciously or not, you're giving your brain the message of, good thing I didn't share that, because otherwise that would have been really bad. I would have been made fun of. I would have been excluded. Someone would have called me out. I would have offended someone. Whatever your fear is, that's kind of at the end of this for you. Like, by shrinking yourself, every time you don't participate, every time you minimize your experience, consciously or not, you are giving into that concept that you don't have OCD. Good thing you didn't say that, Sarah, because otherwise you would have been made fun of, or XYZ would have happened. So by avoiding, you're only ever, subscribing to that possibility. You're not opening yourself up to all the other possibilities that are also out there, that by opening up, you might actually be accepted by the OCD community. Wow, how good would that feel? You're not also opening yourself up to the possibility that it's going to be a completely neutral experience, and everyone is so wrapped up in their own OCD, and they're also probably worried about not having enough OCD that they don't really care about you, right? Like, it's kind of like if you were fearful of dogs, and if a dog's walking down the street and you are like, oh crap, I don't want to be by this dog, the dog's going to bite me, and you exit and you walk on the other side of the street, you're like, good thing I didn't walk by that dog, otherwise he would have bit me. It's possible that that dog could have bit you, and it's possible as you open up, Sarah, that you might get rejected, that someone might disagree, that someone might call you out, that whatever. We can't say that that's not going to happen, but it's also possible that you're going to walk by that dog and the dog could be super sweet. The dog could totally love you. The OCD could totally accept you and be like, wow, me too. The dog could also walk right by you and not care. It could be a totally neutral and anticlimactic experience. So you really, truly just have to open yourself up to those opportunities, and you'll never do that unless you open yourself up and challenge yourself, unless you allow yourself to walk by that dog. You're never opening yourself up to other possibilities that also exist. Still possible that it could not go your way. We're not going to say that it can't, but by avoiding, you're only ever subscribing to that reality, and you're ignoring and closing yourself off to the other realities that could also exist. Love the inhibitory learning model. So good. Oh, someone was asking about the podcast. My podcast, it's called All the Hard Things. So you can find it on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Google Podcasts, anywhere where you get your podcasts. I will actually find Emily's episode and I'll link it for you guys in the chat. So look out for that in just a second.
I saw a question that I thought was, I guess, a good, they're all good questions, but Stuart Underwood said, if the content.
That's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good question. Okay, I'm gonna find this episode and link it. Jackie, you go for it first, and then I'll catch up.
Okay. It says, if the content of OCD is irrelevant, then why is ERP content based? My answer for this is that the themes are relevant when it comes to exposures. So it doesn't matter the theme in terms of how you treat it, but you use the theme to determine what your exposures are going to be. That makes sense. So if you have, harm OCD, I saw some posts about harm OCD, then you're going to, come up with exposures that are kind of pushing you to your limits to share yourself, that you may or may not hurt somebody. Someone was talking about knives, like being afraid you're going to stab someone, and your exposure would be that you have to hold knives, or that you have to hold knives and allow other people to be in the room with you. Someone that has a different theme, that exposure may not do anything for them. So a different person that has another theme, like sexual orientation OCD, they're going to have totally different exposures. So that's why the content matters, because of the exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Yeah, I think too. I mean, I think Stuart's wondering too, like how we talk about how OCD is OCD and OCD is OCD, and it's about doubt, and that's, I've talked about that a lot lately. Like that's a new concept that I didn't subscribe to until probably like the past year. But once I was taught it, I loved it, and I found a lot of success with it. So this came to me from Dr. Reid Wilson, R-E-I-D Wilson, and he is amazing. Love is an open door, says mind-blowing question.
Yeah.
LOL. That's so funny. So here's my take on it. So I am of the belief that OCD doesn't have as much to do with content as we think. So when it comes to subtypes like contamination OCD and sexual orientation OCD and relationship OCD, I do believe that those those subtypes are relevant, because that's what evokes uncertainty in you based on your values, based on your life experiences. So, and I have lived experience with OCD. So I've always been an anxious person. It really blew up in my postpartum experience. So when I had my son 3.5 years ago, struggled hardcore with thinking I left him somewhere, thinking that like, even though I could see him in my rearview mirror, I thought for sure, am I too sleep deprived that I'm actually like hallucinating right now and I could have left him somewhere? There's a lot of other things. But so OCD is about doubt. It's called the doubt disorder, right? So it attacks us because we have brains that don't tolerate doubt. We don't tolerate a lack of conclusion. We don't tolerate like unfinished edges. We don't tolerate 99.999%. We want that conclusion. We want that end. And so in OCD, it comes in and it swoops in based on our genetic predispositions, based on life events, lots of different things. And it basically creates a subtype and creates content that's going to evoke emotions and reactions in me based on my experiences. So postpartum OCD didn't come up. It probably doesn't come up for Emily because she's not a mom, right? So, and that's what I valued most. Like, I don't really value.
It attacks what you value the most.
Yeah, it attaches to what you value most. And like, I don't value, what don't I value? I don't value health that much, like not as much as my son or my family. Like that's just, it's not my thing. So I never really cared about getting sick. Like if I got sick, oh well, not that big of a deal. It just really didn't fluster my feathers. OCD creates content that's going to come in and fluster your feathers based on your values, based on what it is that's going to really get you. And so that's why in exposures, we kind of need to use those surface level exposures, like hold on to a dirty door handle or go on a drive, Jenna, and you can't check in your rearview mirror that your son is in the back seat, or look at a picture or read an article of a mom, driving away with her baby on the roof of the car. Like that's why we use those surface level exposures to just like provoke the bear underneath.
Like the actual core fear.
The actual core fear. Yeah. And usually the core fears are really relevant to treatment, I think. And you can identify the core fear by asking yourself, like, okay, this is my fear, and then what? 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 And it's called the downward arrow technique. You can just continue to ask yourself, and then what? And then what? And then if you keep pushing and you keep pushing and you keep pushing, you get to what are some really commonly experienced core fears. The cool thing about core fears is that Emily has them, Jackie has them, I have them. They're universally shared core fears. They're usually things like, I don't want to be excluded from society. I don't want to be a bad person. I don't want to be uncomfortable and miserable forever. I don't want to die. XYZ. Like, the cool thing about core fears is that they're universally shared experiences, that these are all things that people don't generally want to have happen. It's just that OCD comes in and lies and says, if you do these exposures, then you'll be safe. But that's actually complete crap, because we can never be safe from these core fears. We can never be 100% safe from eternal misery. We can never be 100% sure that we're not actually a bad person. Those are all things that on a day-to-day basis, Emily and Jackie and I and everyone here, we all kind of have to just roll the dice with and try our best and hope for the best. It's just that OCD comes in and basically says, as long as you do these rituals, you'll be safe from these core fears, that somehow you're special. By doing these compulsions, you'll be safe. So hopefully that came full circle. But we use the superficial content to basically poke the bear underneath. And I will even tell my members at No CD during exposures, like, at the end of the day, this isn't about maybe I am going to get sick, maybe I'm not. Maybe my hands are dirty, maybe I'm not. Maybe that's initially what you are sitting with, but keep in mind, it's about that underlying uncertainty, that sitting with uncertainty is hard. There are lots of things in life that I'm not sure of. There are lots of things in life that I can't control and that I won't be able to control. And that's truly what it is that you kind of want to sit with. I'm going to link also, there's a video by Dr. Reed Wilson. It's called OCD Winning Strategies. He's an expert in the field of OCD, and he just like totally will take what I just told you and like annihilate it and blow it a million times out of the water, because he's incredible. So he will go all into Stuart's question about how content is irrelevant, but we still need it for exposure purposes to get under. And he like uses his body in a really great way to demonstrate it. Like the superficialness of the exposures allow us to dig, to get underneath, to sit with that underlying uncertainty. I went on a rant, so sorry.
No, that sounds good.
Emily, do you have anything to add?
I would just say, like, basically summing up what you're saying, or like at least part of it, is that like the content isn't like necessarily like what your OCD is, like, but it's how in ERP that you evoke that anxiety, and then you learn how to sit with it and how to like break out of the cycle between the anxiety and then the compulsion.
And when you recognize that the content doesn't actually matter, and when you can accept and learn to truly surrender to the fact that life is full of uncertain crap and we're all rolling the dice, and that's as good as we can get, is just a roll of the dice and do our best, you eliminate the whack-a-mole problem of OCD, because you are, no matter how it comes up, whether it's contamination or sexual intrusive thoughts or real event OCD, right? Like, you accept the uncertainty. You are okay living with that, and you choose not to perseverate or continue to go back to that and have to figure it out and have to figure it out and have to figure it out. You can move on not knowing. You have the skill of being able to have that doubt, have that question, and not answer that question, and regardless of in what form it comes up. Stuart, that was such a good question.
Yay, Stuart.
Yay, Stuart. Okay. Jackie, you talked about we kind of talked about values in the last one. if OCD goes to our values, what is it about plants, trees, bugs, and animals that I feel like something I do or say to them, or if I don't say or do something to them, I can possibly hurt? Yeah. What do you think?
This is where I'd want to do the downward spiral, or the downward arrow questions of like, okay, if you did say something to them, what would the plants or animals, what are you worried would actually happen? Like,
so they go on to say, I treat the plants and animals as if they're people with feelings. And yeah, I know it's weird crap. As we often say with OCD, that it feels weird, but I feel like I have to do it anyway.
But that makes sense. That makes sense that you value plants and animals, it sounds like, just as much or maybe even more than people. And so it makes sense that that is where it kind of attacks, because it sounds like you have a passion, or like these plants and animals, you have a strong value of them. So it makes sense that maybe that's where it's kind of attacking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would just, again, like Jackie said, ask yourself like, okay, well, if I didn't say these things, then what would happen?
Yeah.
Then what would happen? Then what? Then what? Then what? What would that say about me?
Yeah.
If you literally Google the downward arrow technique, you'll find a bunch. If I tell one they're beautiful or I love it and thank it for sharing it, then what? Yeah, you'd have to say a little bit more, kind of identifying what the core fear is.
And when you think you've gone to the core fear, I always encourage the person to ask another time, and then what would happen? Because sometimes when you think you get to your core fear, it's actually deeper. So it would be like, well, what if you didn't say that? What would it mean if they were hurt? And what would that mean about you? And keep going.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh, here's the core fear. So they don't feel left out.
Okay.
So the exposure here would be to do all the things to make people feel left out. Plan an outing and specifically don't invite someone. I was going to get like a little lunch date pulled together for my friends in a week or two. And I texted, there's usually like 5 or 6 of us that go together. I just picked the first 3. And I was like, someone's probably going to get upset. Okay. I just picked the first 3. Someone might feel left out. It's possible. Maybe not. So do something like that. Like go out of your way to do things that might feel like you're leaving someone out, and let yourself feel that way and continue to do it anyway.
Yeah. And I'd want to ask, what does that mean if they feel left out? Why does that matter?
Right. Is that like, am I hurting their feelings? Like, did I offend someone? There could be a lot of different things. Okay. Last question. I like this. And again, like, I think, you give an example here, but I think it can be, Lana says, oh man, that would suck. Yep. There you go. There's your exposure. So this is an example, but again, like, I want you guys to like take the specifics out of it and find a way to apply it to your own scenario, because the content doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So what are your thoughts on receiving healthy advice versus reassurance? A lot of my OCD surrounds my body and looking accurate in pictures, a bit like body dysmorphic disorder and scrupulosity mixed, I guess. I have loved ones who don't say this looks like you, but instead discuss how angles and lighting can affect this. Do you think this is still a form of reassurance? So again, like, I don't even think that we need to talk about like the content of what it is that they're saying or the content of your worries. When it comes to healthy advice versus reassurance, I do think that sometimes people get caught up in like, well, what's normal? What's normal? And I know it can be like an easy question to kind of get wrapped up in, right? Because we do want to feel normal, whatever normal even means. Right. And sometimes, consciously or not, we might use that as like a defense in favor of our OCD. Like, what's normal, right? Like, it's normal. But I'm going to give you guys a perfect example. So I've talked a lot about how in my own postpartum experience, I've talked about this before. I really struggled being alone with my son. that was like the worst experience. It was highly anxiety provoking. And I would literally just watch the clock until my husband was about to be home. And I would ask him numerous times, when are you coming home? What time are you done tonight? What location are you working? So I could calculate how long it would take for him to get home. I was like, if I could just white knuckle it until he gets home, I'm good. It's probably normal and healthy for families to know, like, when their spouse is coming home. It's 3.5 years later, and I still do not ask my husband when he's coming home from work because it's not good for me. And even though now, like, I'm probably, like, I feel like I'm recovered. I feel like I would no longer meet diagnostic criteria for that. I'm not playing games with that. Like, I'm not, it's not good for me. And so I would encourage all of you to try not to get too far into that hole of like, well, what's normal? What's not? What's normal? What do other people do? I would always try to ask yourself, what's good for my treatment? Yeah. And I think that will, like, 9 times out of 10 lead you in the right direction. Yeah. That answer 9 times out of 10, I think, will be very obvious to you guys. So I would ask yourself, you know, is it good for me to be getting, is it good for my treatment to be getting this type of feedback from people at all, regardless of whether it's normal or not? It might just be like one of those things like that you just aren't, that it's just not good for you to do, and that you just have to learn to live without. Maybe other people can do that. I know lots of other people who know exactly when their husband gets home, and my husband sometimes gets home at 4, sometimes he's not home until 8:30 at night. It's a total roll of the dice. I choose to not know that information because it's not good for me. What do you think?
I think that I guess as a challenge, I think if you are asking yourself that question, is this helpful or not, or is this reassurance or not? I would encourage you to try to do without it. Mm-hmm. You know, if you have that question, then maybe, well, what's it like if I don't know the answer, but I just, practice that I don't get that reassurance or I don't get that response.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Emily?
Yeah, I definitely think that it depends on like who you are, what the difference between reassurance and advice is. I also think that something that like can help distinguish between like advice and reassurance is like reassurance usually like speaks to like feelings or emotions, and advice is usually more actionable. So if you're really having trouble telling if something's reassurance or advice, then you can do that. But also, I think that it's totally a fine boundary to tell people that you're not looking for advice. Mm-hmm. Like you're, on your own journey, and a lot of people just like don't really know what's going on or the best way to approach treating, like eating disorders, body dysmorphic disorder, OCD, etc. You're like, I don't need your advice right now. This isn't like, I'm not in a place where I'm okay to accept it. Like, I really appreciate your concern. I appreciate you like trying to go out of your way to help me. But right now, what's best for me is just, knowing that you're supporting me. I don't need to hear the advice.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, I have another thought to this. Usually it's reassurance if you know that you've asked this question before and have gotten the same answer and you're asking for it again. So a lot of times if you aren't satisfied with the answer and you ask it again, whether it's that moment or in a day, then that's reassurance.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
If it's you and you're like, oh, sweet, and you don't worry about it again or ask that question, then that was maybe helpful advice or whatever. But
mm-hmm.
but that's the compulsion, is that nothing kind of makes it ever really feel better long term.
Aw. This is really nice to end on. I can't believe how well therapists and the OCD and IOCDF advocates too have gotten so far and practice what you preach. Yes. And I think a lot of that has to do, like, it's because of what we do. I can at least say for myself, like, it's because of what I do, I'm able to practice what I preach. Like, it'd be really hard. And definitely not perfect. Definitely not perfect. But it holds me accountable. doing work like this for sure. Emily, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Just, like following people like this and sharing like my journey, and also just like talking to my family and friends about like my progress and like, my mental health has definitely like helped keep me accountable and propelling my recovery.
Yeah, I love it. Well, you guys, we're at the end of the hour here, so I want to remind you all where to find Emily. I did also post a direct link to our podcast episode. No, I didn't. Have you guys heard of this? A Bergen 4-day treatment? Jackie, I think, were you here when we talked about? No, that was with Laura.
Yeah.
It came up in another one. Have you guys heard of the Bergen 4-day treatment? I'm skeptical. I haven't heard about it, but
Yeah, it's on the IOCDF website though.
I don't know.
Oh,
I just found it.
Oh, okay. If it's on the IOCDF website, it's probably worth checking out. But
yeah,
is it on the website?
It came up in another live. I didn't realize it was on the IOCDF website, but I'll have to do some research.
I haven't heard of it.
So, you guys, I did post a direct link to my podcast episode with Emily if you want to hear more about that. And I'm also going to post a direct link to that YouTube video that I referenced earlier with Dr. Reed Wilson about specifically the content of OCD and how that doesn't really matter as much, but it's still about that uncertainty and why we still use that content superficially to kind of get to the core. So as we wrap up here, Jackie, why don't you tell them where to find you? Just remind them one more time where they can find you. And then Emily, if you want to wrap up too and remind them where they can find you, and I'll get the links for you guys.
So again, you can find me on Instagram at Jackie Shapin Therapy. And I think somewhere on here it probably says my name for spelling. So just at Jackie Shapin Therapy. And I looked up the Bergen thing and it looks like a super duper intensive thing, like an intensive treatment that really I think prepares you to do what you need to, like it kind of gives you all the tools. And I think there's like a lot of extensive exposure that happens in it says like the 2 middle days.
So it's like flooding?
I mean, it says the two middle days are one prolonged treatment session interrupted by the natural occurrence of sleep.
And then it says, and then there's 3 weeks after of behavioral changes into normal living. So it's not just 4 days. It's just kind of like a jump start, I think.
Okay.
And there is like the first, it seems like the first and the 4th day are like all about education. So, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know much about it, but I just know that it does have a huge educational piece, and it's not just 4 days.
And then maybe they use the 4-day to grab your attention.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to improve in their OCD in 4 days? Plus, if I had 2 full days of doing education with someone on ERP, it would also probably be life-changing for them too, right? Like, I think psychoeducation is so impactful when it comes to exposure and response prevention and just like teaching the lifestyle. Dr. Reed Wilson, the gentleman that I have referenced and who I'll link again, he did an experiment or was doing an experiment. I don't know what the results were, but he was basically going to do that. He was basically going to get like 50 people who have OCD in a room, basically like talk at length about ERP and talk at length about OCD and why they're not actually thoughts that mean anything about you and just the cycle and what compulsions do and how they negatively reinforce and da-da-da. And he was going to try to make the effort to see, like, without knowing anyone's content, without knowing what any one person's triggers were, could he reduce their YBOC score, their Yale-Brown Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Scale score? And I mean, you probably could.
Yeah, that's cool.
I mean, so that's another, like, these webinars are so impactful. So, Emily, thank you for looking that up, you guys. I'm going to link that YouTube video with Dr. Reed Wilson.
Thing I'm going to say over and over.
Emily, do you want to tell them really quick again, just where they can find you in addition to on my podcast?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. It's just Emily L. Feldman. That's my username, and I would love to have you join me over there.
Yeah, awesome. So I think that's everything, you guys. I won't be back until next week, but I'm sure you'll probably see these lovely individuals again sometime in the future. So thank you guys so much for your awesome questions. Thank you guys for remaining supportive. Be sure to come back for our other lives. I have some research to do on this 4-day treatment. All right. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye.